Hi, this is Roger Moore, and you're listening to James Bond Radio.
Hello, and welcome to James Bond Radio. My name is Jack Lugo, and today I bring to you the latest episode of The Comics of Bond. Today I have a very special guest. His name is Ibrahim Moustafa. Some of you may already be familiar with his work. He produced some really great Bond movie posters a couple years back that gets shared every now and then. He's also shared them on his Instagram page recently. So we do mention that during the episode. If you haven't followed him on Instagram, you definitely should. He's also very much involved in Dynamite Comics, which should come as no surprise. He has a single issue called Solstice that has been out for a while. It's a great Bond story. It's still available. Definitely check that out. And also at the very top of the show, we have a very special announcement about Ibrahim's latest involvement over at Dynamite Comics. So be sure to check that out. Ibrahim is also a consummate Bond fan. I think a lot of you will find his answers to the quickfire questions very fascinating. It was very fun to discuss all things Bond with him. So just so you know, this interview was recorded early on in January, a couple months ago. So, there may be some things that obviously we know now about Bond 25 that we discussed back then that we didn't know. So in case there's any sort of confusion about that, as the interview was recorded a couple months ago. So without further ado, here is my interview with the extraordinarily talented Ibrahim Moustafa.
Who are you?
My name's Bond. James Bond.
Bond.
James.
Bond, what do you think you're doing?
Keeping the British hand up, sir.
Welcome to James Bond Radio. News, reviews, and discussion of all things 007.
Pussy.
As you can see, I have no problem with female authority.
Oh, pipe down 007.
Do you expect me to talk?
No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to buy.
Welcome to James Bond Radio. My name is Jack Lugo. Today we are presenting the Comics of Bond. I am here with a very special guest, the extraordinarily talented Ibrahim Moustafa. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, before we kick off the show and start talking about, some of your Bond in general and what we have in store for 2019, I think there's an announcement that was recently made by Dynamite Comics. Do you want to do the honors?
Yes, sir. Yeah. Starting with issue 7, I am drawing James Bond Origin with Jeff Parker, and then issues 10, 11, and 12, he and I are actually co-writing off of a plot that I devised. And then I'm drawing those as well. So very exciting times for me.
Wow.
Because I'm a big Bond fan.
So for anyone in our audience who doesn't know, Ibrahim Moustafa is both an artist and a writer, and he's drawn and written comics, obviously beforehand, and you've done work with Bond specifically with Dynamite Comics. In the past, you had your own solo single issue and called Solstice, and then now and you've done variant covers, and you've collaborated with some of the other artists there as well. So I'm really excited. I've seen a lot of your work, and I'm really excited to find out that you're going to be involved with Bond Origin, both as an artist and as a co-writer.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I'm a huge Bond fan. That's how I ended up getting any of these gigs in the first place. Is because I was shouting it from the rooftops, and so yeah, the ability to have my fingerprints in whatever capacity on the official Fleming canon is just, it's an unimaginable dream come true. And I'm so excited, and Nate Cosby, our editor, is a good friend and a great guy to work with, and Jeff Parker and I have been friends for years, and we live in the same city, so we actually get to meet up and talk about this stuff as we're planning it. So it really is, as far as I'm concerned, best case scenario.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I mean, your name has actually come up in a few of my other interviews with both Greg Pak and with Jeff Parker, and I've been following you on social media, and you strike me as someone who really has been a Bond fan for a long time.
Yeah, and it's funny, the chronology of all of this, and my involvement with the comics has been it's been kind of all over the place. I was initially going to launch the Origin series with Jeff Parker, but scheduling, in comics can be such a road full of speed bumps and pitfalls and stuff. So, different projects come up, different delays happen, approvals, all that stuff kind of, prevented me from doing the first half of it. Luckily, Nate found Bob Q, who is just incredible and a tough act to follow, but he and I have actually become good buddies too, which is great. And then, during that time, while I had to, go to another project while they were working on the first half, Nate and I had been, I'd been pitching different ideas to him, and he got an idea of what a Bond nut I am. So when the opportunity to do the Solstice special came up, he went to bat for me and said, "Hey, you should have this guy write and draw one." So, luckily, I was able to pitch something, and they liked it, and it got to happen. And that was definitely a career highlight for me. I mean, literally a dream come true. I've literally woken up from dreams about a Bond comic that I got to make, so wow. Being able to write and draw one was just amazing.
I'm really excited, and I'm sure our listeners will be too. I mean, I've been following Bond Origin as the issues have been coming out, and they've done some really great work so far. So I'm looking forward to what's in store. When your contribution kicks in, I'm really excited to look forward to that.
Thanks, man.
So before we get more into the comics, I want to ask you some quickfire questions, which we ask all our guests, and I'm excited to sort of find out what what your answers are.
Sure.
So are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So what is your favorite Bond film?
That's one that kind of depends on the day, right?
Yeah, for me too. Yeah.
So it's a two-part answer, if that's okay. I think the best Bond movie is Casino Royale. I think it's a perfect film, beginning to end. I haven't been able to find a single flaw in, however many dozens of times I've watched it. My favorite is Skyfall, because it's one that you can sit down and watch beginning to end. It's beautifully shot. The director of photography on that, Roger Deakins, is just brilliant, and it's one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen, period, let alone Bond films.
It captures London. I mean, it has that London feel, and
the colors and the framing and the lighting, I mean, it's just brilliant. And it's, Casino Royale, I get really wrapped up in the love story, right?
Yeah.
And you almost forget every time you watch it how sad it ends up being, because I get so invested in their relationship. So, Skyfall is one that you can, at least for me, I can get in and get out and have a great time, and it doesn't linger as much as, the Vesper romance and death and all that stuff. So yeah, that's my two-part answer.
Very cool. So, question 002, what is your favorite Bond book?
That's another two-parter. I mean, Casino Royale is fantastic, but I think I gravitate more toward Moonraker.
Okay.
I love the staging in that book. I love that it starts off in London, and M asks a favor of Bond. Those are some of my favorite Bond stories, and that's I leaned into that heavily in Solstice,
and tries to get needs Bond help to sort of to find out how Hugo Drax is cheating at cards, and that whole friendship, the kind of camaraderie between M and Bond is interesting at the beginning.
Yeah, and it captures so one of the things that I love the most about certain movies where you start off in London and M's office, and you see a bit of the high society aspect of Bond's life, when they're at Blades Club, And then it takes you to a more exotic location. I mean, not the most exotic in a Bond story in Moonraker, but still, a change of scenery, and the villain is very compelling because you start off hating him, and then you start to like him, and then you hate him again. And and you learn a lot more about Bond because Casino Royale starts you off in the casino, right? And it eventually backtracks and bounces all over. But Moonraker really helps to flesh out the character more. You learn more about his life in the office, and his secretary and the relationship with her. And I think it's a really well-rounded Bond story, and it's one that I hope that someday they do in justice in film, because the Roger Moore Moonraker was all over the place.
It was a bit of a mess, but I mean, there is a lot there to be mined. Especially, I'm surprised Gala Brand hasn't been used as a name for a Bond girl.
Yeah, absolutely. And weapons of mass destruction are always a concern, no matter the era, right? So it's a story that they could at least mine from, if not, obviously they wouldn't do a direct adaptation. But I think, I'm going to. This is a quick fire questions. I'll let you.
Okay, you can take our time. There's no rush at all. Unless you have to go somewhere. Okay. Well, this actually leads into the next question. Who is your favorite Bond girl?
Oh gosh, I always draw a blank on her name. And I was just talking about her to a friend the other day. Olga Kurylenko from Quantum of Solace. Camille. That's her name. Yes. I love that she has her own agency and her own story arc, and she and Bond have a sort of, there's maybe a little bit of magnetism there, but they both know they're just not in a place for that, and they say as much. And
I think a lot of people sort of who aren't big fans of that film, they kind of forget that it's almost the emotional journey that they go through. Her character arc sort of informs Bond's character arc in the sense that she's someone who's looking for revenge for what happened to her family, and she goes after the general, and she finally does get that revenge, and Bond sees what that does to her, and so in a way she's almost responsible for Bond sort of going back to being that blunt instrument and sort of disconnecting from Vesper in a way that he had to in order to keep going on being 007, of course.
Right. And, quick aside about that movie, I do feel that it is the most Fleming of the Craig movies. I mean, even obviously Casino Royale is such a close adaptation that, that one probably takes that seat. But in terms of the formula of Quantum of Solace, it really does play out like a Fleming novel. And I think it had the unfortunate spot of being the movie after Casino Royale and the movie before Skyfall, So I think if it came out after Spectre, it would have been hailed as one of the better Bond movies,
People they wanted to see Casino Royale Part 2, and that's not what that movie is. I've come to appreciate it a lot more. I mean,
it's one of my favorites. Times. Yeah, I mean, it's right after Casino Royale and Skyfall for me personally.
Yeah, I mean, just in the last year, I've rewatched it like maybe 3 or 4 times, and each time I find something different to appreciate about it.
Yeah.
Question 004: who is your favorite Bond actor?
I say this to you, Jack, staring at a 6-foot tall cardboard cutout in my office of this man, Timothy Dalton.
Okay, I think one of I think it might have been Jeff Parker who mentioned that. That you're both fans of Timothy Dalton. If you had to pick between Living Daylights and License to Kill, which is your favorite Timmy performance?
Living Daylights all day long. There is a lot to love about License to Kill, but it does, for me, stray a little bit too far into the 80s aesthetic of there's ninjas. I mean, it's a more it's a more faithful adaptation of Live and Let Die than Live and Let Die was in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I love revenge movies, so it's high up there for me. And I thought Robert Davi was a great villain too.
Oh yeah, he was great.
I just think
Benicio del Toro as Dario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Dalton to me is Fleming's Bond walking off the page and into the screen. The look, the way he carries himself. I mean, he looks the most like how Fleming described Bond of any of the actors who played him. And yeah, I think he's one of the great actors of his generation to boot. So.
A lot of people have been coming around to the notion that he sort of, was a precursor to Daniel's Bond in the sense that, it's more grounded, and he went for kind of what Fleming was after in the books. And I think, more people are coming around to appreciate those two films. I mean, it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I think they just weren't ready for it, right? At the time, it was just these were fun. What happened to Bond movies? They used to be funny.
I guess people were used to sort of the escapist sort of feel of the Bond movies, and that's not what especially License to Kill. That's not what they delivered.
Right.
Okay, so quick fire question 005. What is your earliest memory of Bond?
Watching I believe it was either TBS or TNT would do those, 7 Days of Bond or whatever. Usually in the fall around Thanksgiving, when the next Bond movie would come out, they would rerun a bunch of the old ones. And I believe it was Goldfinger that I first watched. I would have been 12 maybe. And then shortly after that, of course, GoldenEye came out, or no, I guess I was younger than that, because GoldenEye was what, 96?
95 actually.
95, yeah. So I was 10 years old when that one came out, and of course my friends had GoldenEye on the N64, and so those all kind of happened around the same time for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think we both come from a generation that, GoldenEye was my first. I mean, I think I might have seen, a little bit of Bond before that, but because there was that big hiatus, it was the first one that I saw in the movie theaters with my dad. So for a lot of people kind of closer to our age, it's sort of the movie that got us into it. So question 006. If you haven't been to any Bond locations, which maybe you have, what Bond location would you like to visit?
Ooh, that's a good one. I don't believe, well, I've been to Vegas, so I guess that counts, but I haven't been to any of the specific places where they filmed or anything. I really love that hillside in Scotland where in Skyfall, where he and M get out of the car and are just kind of staring off into the distance.
Yeah, there are a few people on Facebook who actually find that spot and try to find the right angle and sort of, take a photo and then match it up with the still from that movie.
Yeah, I think that would be it for me. Yeah, I would love to see Pinewood Studios though too. So
Cool. So question 007: what is your favorite scene in the series, if you can nail one down?
One that always comes to mind is, again, in Skyfall, that fight scene with, I can't remember the guy's name, but he's the guy from the opening scene, and they're fighting in that glass skyscraper against the electronic billboard backdrop.
The shadow fight?
Yeah,
that is cool.
That's a big one, but I really love the opening scene from Quantum of Solace, the car chase. I think that's one of the better car chases in film.
That is a thrilling car chase, yes.
Yeah. So I guess toss up between those two. It's hard to pick just one of the stuff,
totally
right?
wreck that Aston Martin.
Oh, it's heartbreaking, man.
Okay, so final quickfire question. What's the most Bondian thing you've ever done?
Well, I guess this is the fastest one that comes to mind. Maybe there's other stuff, but I was married last year, or I guess
congratulations.
the year before. Thank you. I guess now that we're in 2019, it was 2017. So, and I ordered a replica suit of the suit he wears in Skyfall when he first meets Mallory in M's office.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I got married in a replica of that suit. So maybe, I'm not creeping around and doing secret agent hijinks, wearing a Bond suit might be the closest thing I've got.
Hey, that's a lot more. I can't think of a Bondian thing I've ever really done. So kudos to you for that.
All right.
Very cool. So we were talking about Bond Origin. When I interviewed Jeff Parker, he described working on it as both freeing and limiting at the same time, which kind of goes to the notion that, like, obviously, in the Fleming canon, the Fleming books, there isn't that much to go by if you're writing a Bond with Bond Origin for that period of time in his life, his service during World War II. So it is freeing in that sense, but it's also limiting in the sense that, like, you can't just make everything up on a whim. You have to, there's a lot of research that goes into it. So
right.
Would you agree with that characterization?
Yeah, I think for my contribution, I'm definitely most beholden to visual continuity of the time, right? So I have to make sure that everyone's uniforms look correct and that the vehicles that I'm drawing are the vehicles of that time. I have to make sure I'm not finding reference of a 1942 Ford staff car, right? Since we're in 1941 at this point. Luckily, a lot of that stuff gets worked out by the time it gets to me if I'm not having a hand in writing it. The scripts and the story, the second half of our arc that I plotted and Jeff and I are co-writing, or I came up with the initial plot, then Jeff and I plotted it out in more in depth together. That was it sort of takes Bond away from the war for a bit. I mean, everything is still very much mired in the war because, it was World War II. Right. But we get to see a little bit more of a street level story, I guess, is a better way to put it. And in that sense, we had a lot more room to work. So, but I think there's also a part of this too, where I'm pretty well mired in the canon just personally as a fan. So there's, I haven't hit a ton of speed bumps as far as notes go, just because I think I kind of know what they're looking for in terms of what the actual Bond canon stuff is. I mean, I've read and have a copy of Silverfin, the Young Bond graphic novel from
awesome. Kudos for you for that. I love those books, the Young Bond books. I mean, I still haven't read the last one, Red Nemesis, but Charlie Hickson and Steve Cole did a phenomenal work. And I mean, that ends with him around 15. So obviously your story takes place after, once World War
right.
In 1941, World War II, he's about like 17 or so. And those,
correct.
So, those were great books.
Sorry, quick aside. Speaking of books, when you asked me what my favorite Bond book was, another one I really love that I don't think it's talked about enough is Carte Blanche by Jeffrey Deaver.
Oh, one of the continuation novels. I actually haven't read that one.
So as far as I know, it's the only story that, it's preceded and followed by a couple other Bond books, but I believe those take place in the original canon. As far as I understand, Carte Blanche is the only book that reimagines Bond for the modern day.
I think so. Yeah. I mean,
and I really enjoyed it. It's a very cool interpretation of Fleming's Bond now. So if anyone hasn't checked that one out, I highly recommend it. It's a fun read.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of what Anthony Horowitz is doing currently with his books. Forever and a Day is phenomenal. That takes place before Casino Royale, and Trigger Mortis takes place shortly after Goldfinger. Both great books. But I imagine Jeff Parker also talked about like some of the notes that he received back from Ian Fleming publications. What is it like sort of working with them? What kind of feedback do you usually get from them?
Again, for my part, not a ton, because, the visuals are a little more straightforward. So I think there's sort of less feedback to give as long as it looks good,
Okay.
with Solstice, you know, there was a little bit of feedback, but again, I think I'm just lucky that I have a pretty good idea of the character, so I don't think I'm straying off into any areas that are causing any red flags for them. I think, you know, knowing my stuff, I guess, helps with that. But yeah, you know, the feedback that I have received from them in terms of notes is always excellent. Like, I actually, in Solstice, I had him driving an Aston Martin, and they were like, you know, we've seen the Aston Martin a lot, and Bond drove a lot of different cars, so maybe we could explore something different. And I really just wanted to draw an Aston Martin, you know.
Yeah, why wouldn't you?
Yeah. And, you know, at that note, I was like, you know what, they're absolutely right. And then so I did research of different French cars, because the story takes place in Paris, and I found the Talbot Lago, and I just fell in love with the look of it. And it is somewhat reminiscent of the old DB5 anyway. And, you know, I think the end result was better. So that's a scenario where, you know, it was a fairly minor note, but it ended up enriching the story quite a bit, I think.
Yeah, Solstice, for anyone who hasn't checked it out, it's a phenomenal, you know, short. It's obviously, you know, it's a single issue short story, but it's definitely worth checking out. So you got to write and draw it. Do you find that sort of gives you an advantage, you know, being able to do both? And is there
absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Is there one that you prefer over the other?
In terms of writing or drawing?
Yeah.
You know, I look at them as one whole that is storytelling, right? It's interesting. You know, I have an analogy that I like to use for illustrating this aspect of it. Writing or drawing from someone else's script is a bit like somebody went into your closet and picked out your clothes for you. And you're like, yeah, I mean, they're my clothes, but you know, if I'm putting my best foot forward and playing to my strengths, and maybe, you know, going to a job interview or a first date or something, I wouldn't have picked what you picked for me to wear, right? Because that's not how I feel most confident in that outfit. Right. Whereas if you're writing for yourself, you're going, okay, this is my favorite shirt, it's my favorite pair of pants, et cetera, and you really feel like you're stepping out, you know, as your best version of yourself. So if I'm writing for myself, I know the things I want to see, and I know the things I feel like I can draw most confidently. You know, I'm lucky with Jeff, because Jeff is also an artist, but a lot of writers just really honestly don't think very visually, because, you know, they're writers. So a lot of times they'll write this scene that, you know, they feel really strongly about, and it's a good scene, you know, with good dialogue, but they set it somewhere that's incredibly boring. I mean, Jack, I can't tell you the number of times I've got every script I ever get from a writer has a scene that takes place in a hallway.
Oh man.
And I'm just like, there's nothing more boring than a hallway, you know? And it's a lot of like weird parallel lines I have to draw. It's a pain all around. And I'm like, why don't we put this somewhere cool, you know? But they don't always think about where it takes place, because what's happening is what they're focusing on more.
They're focused more on plot than on setting and stuff.
Right. So, you know, especially when you have a Bond story, the last place you want to do something is a hallway, you know. Right. I know that Daredevil has made hallway fight scenes popular, but, you know. So, yeah, I think, you know, when it's up to me, I have certain ideas of visuals that I want to represent within the story, and then I'm able to, you know, build a scene around that, or you know, explore certain things that, I want to try this technique. And Solstice, it was a unique challenge, because it was a single issue story. It was 30 pages as opposed to the regular 20. So I did have 10 extra pages of real estate, but I needed to tell a complete story within that frame. And I wanted to hit all of the notes of a classic Bond story within that. So one of the things I had to do was figure out how to make an elaborate and, you know, interesting fight scene take place in just a few pages. So, you know, that was sort of some problem solving that I had to do in the writing and drawing stage, which was a lot of fun. So yeah, you know, any day I can write and draw my own stuff, I prefer it. And the comics industry is interesting, because a lot of times you're perceived as either one or the other. So I've been working a lot to make myself both, so that I'm kind of, you know, able to put my best foot forward all around.
That helps to be, sort of multifaceted in that way. And Solstice actually also takes place around Christmas, so it was kind of cool to kind of revisit it around this time of year. So definitely, if you haven't checked out Solstice, you could find it. It's in one of the collections, the hard case files collection, but you could also find it individually on the Kindle and stuff that you can find this single issue as well. So
yeah, and if you have Comixology, it's often on sale. I mean, it retailed for $4.99 when it came out, but a lot of times you can get it for 99 cents now. Yeah. That it's been out for a while. And for those who don't know or haven't read it, it's essentially I did it in the vein of the Fleming short stories. It was very much inspired by For Your Eyes Only, and sort of the beginning of Moonraker, where M calls Bond into his office and asks him for a personal favor, and the hilarity ensues. I don't want to give the plot away because there are I don't want to give surprises
either. Yeah.
But yeah, we've got a James Bond action cold open scene. There's a scene with Q, or Boothroyd as we represent him in the book. There's a little flirtation with Moneypenny, the scene in M's office, and then Bond off on a mission. So and I drew some inspiration in the fight scene from Russia with Love. There's all the Fleming fingerprints are all over this thing, so I hope that Bond fans pick up on that stuff and really enjoy it.
Very cool. Now you also do variant covers. So I'm not familiar with how that works, but like do you enjoy doing those? Like for anyone who doesn't know, it's sort of like when other Bond comics come out. There's one cover that sort of is the main cover, but then there are a few variant covers that, like, if you buy the Kindle issue or if you buy the physical copy, you see them towards the end, and the ones that you do are really great, by the way.
Oh, thank you, man. Yeah, I covers are one of my favorite things to do. It's a unique challenge because rather than having 20 pages, you're trying to tell a story in one image. So you really have to distill down the story into a single frame, essentially, that represents it. And the nice thing about covers is you can get more representational with them too. You can play with scale. So like, for example, if Bond is, one of the variant covers that's been solicited already. So we have a scene where Bond has to board a ship and he climbs up the anchor, right? Yeah. And one of the variant covers, I believe Christian Ward did, who's a phenomenal artist, shows Bond on an anchor, but the anchor looks like the hammer and sickle from the Russian flag, right, or the USSR. So, you can play with visual representation in that way, and get a little bit more graphic designy with it. So I really enjoy that a lot, especially with my favorite subject matter. And I actually did movie posters just for fun on my own of each Bond movie. And I tried to incorporate that sort of thing in each one of those. And those are up on my website for anyone who's curious to take a look at them. So yeah, it's an exercise I love to do, that I'll do for fun if I have the time anyway. So it's a blast to do it for my actual job,
Yeah, no, that sounds like fun. Greg Pak, actually, when I talked to him, he told me that you had a hand in the redesign of his new Odd Job inspired character for his series that he's working on. Can you tell me the process that went into sort of redesigning the new Odd Job?
Yeah. So another instance of, serendipity, or things, scheduling conflicts, etc. I was initially going to launch that book with him as well, but yeah, it just timing didn't work out, and we had Origin going. So but yeah, so I designed Odd Job and Agent K, which is the female agent that shows up, I believe, in the end of the first issue. And with Odd Job, I think Greg and I were pretty well aligned with what that character was going to look like. He kind of had a general description, and I pointed out a few actors and said, with what you're describing him as, I kind of picture this guy. And he was like, yep, that is along the lines of what I was thinking as well. And then we kind of fine tuned it a little bit, but I wanted to emphasize the sort of updated style. The Odd Job from the Goldfinger movie, for example, has like the gray pants and the black jacket and the waistcoat.
Yeah.
So color blocking was a thing we wanted to play with, and kind of what does that look like if you're sort of a more fashionable, updated version of that. And we wanted him to be formidable in stature, not just that he's like a buff guy, but that he's kind of barrel chested and just kind of a tree trunk of a man anyway, similar to, the way that the original Odd Job was described.
Yeah, Aristocata, yeah. Well,
yeah,
so in the book it's a little different, but obviously in the film, Aristocata.
Right. Well, and there's in the book too, he's got the calluses on his hands that are essentially like a knife edge or whatever that,
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah. So we didn't want to get too cartoonish with it, but we wanted to kind of pay homage to some of that stuff. So yeah, that was a fun process.
Oh, very cool. For anyone who doesn't, who hasn't followed Ibrahim Moustafa on Instagram, you should. He actually does. You do some figurine work.
Yes,
I love when you post pictures of that stuff.
Thanks, man.
Tell me what it's like to do that, and how long does it take to make one of those?
Well, it depends on the figure. So essentially, I make custom action figures, and I've done a bunch thus far. I've done Leon the Professional. I made a little Denzel Washington head to do a Book of Eli character. I made a Antonio Banderas Zorro, Liam Neeson from Taken, and it just kind of. It depends on the supplies you can find. Sometimes you'll find, I like to work in a 7-inch action figure scale, primarily from the brand NECA, which is I think National Entertainment Collectors Association. And they make a lot of really cool figures based on film and TV and stuff like that. So if you, want to make a version of, let's say, so I made one of, Christian Bale from Equilibrium, which I have yet to post, but they made an American Psycho figure. So I used the head from that and then, built the body of his character from Equilibrium. So you can kind of borrow different parts from different figures.
Okay.
Some of them take several days. I made one last night in about 2 hours because it was much more simple. It was kind of just a head swap and then, taking apart some parts and rearranging some clothing and,
did you do a Daniel Craig one? I'm trying to remember.
I'm working on one. Yeah.
Okay.
So I've always wanted to, I love collecting figures because, when you have an interest in a thing that is sort of this intangible thing, like a movie, right? I love having a physical representation of that around me because it just makes me happy, Yeah. So I've always wanted a good Bond one. I actually did make a 12-inch James Bond one. That is meant to look like the initial poster for Spectre that they released, where he's got the black turtleneck on. That one I cobbled together with parts I found on eBay. Somebody made like a custom 12-inch figure Daniel Craig head, and then I just found a body and the clothes, etc. But the 7-inch one, I actually sculpted a head from scratch.
Wow.
And then made multiples of it by making a mold and then a resin cast of it.
How long does that take when you have to do it from scratch?
It's a lot longer. and I set out to make a small run of them because I know a lot of people such as yourself who are Bond fans that would probably want something like that, and just have a lot of friends in general who are like, oh man, I want one of those. So I said, okay, let me make 5 to 7 of these if I can. So I devised a way to try to streamline the process, but it's such a big undertaking, and drawing comics is such heavy work that I've sort of been chipping away at it and doing other one-off figures in the meantime. But I'm setting out to make. I found NECA made a figure that has twin Walther PPKs, so I made a cast of those and reproduced them.
Oh, wow.
And then I found one figure that has a sport coat, or a suit jacket rather, and then another figure that has kind of the right type of slacks, and then I made a generic torso that could be interchanged, and then I'm going to try to do a gray suit version from Skyfall, and then the midnight blue tux from Skyfall as well as kind of like a variant.
My son is just getting into Bond, and my sister-in-law found like a Tomorrow Never Dies Pierce Brosnan toy on eBay, but
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean it's just ridiculous how, because it's hard to find. They don't, you would think that that would be a market for them to explore. I know Big Chief Studios has their line, which is very high end and very high quality, but obviously it's for my son is 9 years old, so I'm not going to buy him a like a $600 figurine. But you would think it would be such an easy thing to do to put out affordable like Bond figurines, but they so far they haven't done it. They have the Funko Pops, which I have a few of them, but
right.
But yeah,
and those. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it would just be such a great thing if they would sort of explore that market.
Yeah, those Big Chief Studios ones, they're just amazing.
They are, yeah.
So the Daniel Craig Bond the 12-inch one is reminiscent of that style. And I'm hoping, they've I don't know if they've released it yet, but they certainly announced the Roger Moore Live and Let Die figure.
I think that they just came out, like they were due out in January. So either they're just about to come out, or they've just come out, and it's a Live and Let Die line. It's Roger Moore, in his the black turtleneck that he wears.
Yeah. The shoulder holster and the Magnum. And
and then it's Solitaire and Baron Samedi.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that they make a Timothy Dalton version, because I will buy that sight unseen. Sideshow made Sideshow Collectibles, which makes the hot toys that a lot of people are familiar with, for like the Avengers and different movies. They had a line of James Bond figures years ago in the 12-inch scale, but they weren't as detailed. They were looked almost more like a high-end Barbie doll. I did recently get a Pierce Brosnan one for pretty inexpensive on eBay. And my plan is to, because the sculpt is amazing. It's just the paint job isn't that great. So my plan is to repaint it to make it look much more realistic and get a new body for it and a tux and everything. And I did get a Timothy Dalton as what's that Prince character from Flash Gordon?
Oh, okay.
Prince Baron, I think they made an action figure of that. So I got that with plans to, shave down the mustache and repaint it and make a Dalton Bond figure as well.
So would you have him in the tux, or would you do the pre-titles Living Daylights when he's in the get-up with the black kind of thing that he wears?
So what I would love to do is make a tux that can. You remember when he goes up to his sniper's nest in that, and he unvelcros the lapel and it goes across his shirt underneath, and it makes him all black.
Yeah.
I would love to find a way to make something like that. The thing is, I don't do fabric clothing with these because the scale, it just doesn't really work very well, and I just don't have the ability, in that size. It works great for 12-inch, but for 6 and 7-inch figures, it's really tough to do correctly. So I've been using the actual molded plastic that I find from other figures and kind of modifying them myself. So we'll see. I found some good suited body figures to use as bases. I've also made a John Wick, so I'm working on like a John Wick version 2 that's a little more articulated, and hoping to take some of the things I learned from that and apply it to a Bond figure. But yeah, I also kind of like the sweater and jacket look he's got in Living Daylights when he's just kind of rolling around in the Aston Martin,
Very cool. Yeah, well, I look forward to that. So when you do eventually, complete that, definitely post that.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
So given some of the recent Bond 25 developments, I know you're a big fan of the Daniel Craig's Bonds, with Cary Fukunaga directing and Léa Seydoux returning. What do you think? What do you think of those developments? Do you like Léa Seydoux's returning?
I'm hopeful. I don't think I disliked Spectre as much as a lot of people. I think in the way of Bond movies, it's certainly nowhere near the bottom. but it left a lot to be desired for me personally. Like, I kind of thought, especially, Christoph Waltz is such an amazing actor, and I was really looking forward to his performance, and I feel like they just didn't give him a lot to chew on.
Give him nearly enough to do.
Yeah, and at one point, when he's got Bond in that torture chair and he's sitting there with loafers without socks on, he looked like a dentist who was like doing a filling for a friend on his day off, so I'm not excited to see that storyline continue specifically. But I think Cary Fukunaga is an amazing visual storyteller, and I think Daniel Craig is going to want to go out on a high note. So I'm hopeful. I was more excited at the idea of another one-off when Danny Boyle was attached.
Yeah, I was excited about that too. I mean, we still don't know all the details of what they were planning.
Right.
But yeah, it was kind of disappointed to see that fall through. But then Cary Fukunaga is a great director. I'm a big fan of what he did with True Detective.
Yeah, same.
So I mean, I think if you're going to go with someone other than Danny Boyle, he's definitely a great choice.
Well, and I do think that the Barbara Broccoli and Michael Wilson, I think that they learn well from missteps. I think that's a trend we've seen, especially, the biggest one probably being from Die Another Day to Casino Royale.
Yeah.
So I think that they're going to be looking to course correct from Spectre because, I think it was a big success financially, but I think, critically and with studio notes and whatnot, they know where the room for improvement is. And I think that, I heard Barbara Broccoli say in an interview once that her father always kind of told her, when in doubt, go back to Fleming. And that's how they ended up going to Casino Royale when they got those rights back. So, maybe this will be kind of a On Her Majesty's Secret Service rehash. Maybe it'll be, something different. We'll see.
Yeah, maybe they'll mine something from the Fleming books. Would you bring back Blofeld if you were in charge?
Probably not. I think that's a sleeping dog that can lie.
Okay.
Unless there's like a really great way to do it.
Yeah, I know Christoph Waltz has said that he's not coming back, but those were, I think, comments that were made, when Danny Boyle was still directing. So,
right.
We don't know if he's been approached again now with Cary Fukunaga and apparently, obviously, going back to Purvis and Wade writing the screenplay. It's possible maybe they've reapproached him, although obviously nothing's been confirmed yet. Yeah, and
I think maybe when Spectre was made, they were riding high off of the success of Skyfall, and they brought John Logan back, and I don't know if you've watched Penny Dreadful.
No, I haven't.
But it's a great show. Sam Mendes produces it, and it's created and written by John Logan, and it actually has a ton of Bond actors in it. I mean, Eva Green is in it. Timothy Dalton, Rory Kinnear is in it. So I think John Logan is very talented, and I don't know if maybe Spectre was just a blip. But either way, and going back to Purvis and Wade, maybe they've been reinvigorated. So we'll see. In the end of the day, we've got 24 other films we can watch at any time. Most of them good, or at least most of them mostly good. So if they stumble a bit along the way, I'm not gonna lose my hat over it.
Although there was also the recent rumors with Rami Malek possibly being considered, although we don't.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there has been talk. I mean, and he has been asked. He was asked on a red carpet recently, and he was very evasive and kind of tight-lipped. But he did say he would love to be a Bond villain.
He'd be a great villain too. Yeah,
he would be a great villain. So I have to imagine that obviously it all depends on scheduling. I mean, one of the things that came up when his name was brought up was that Mr. Robot is going into production soon. So it would obviously depend on them being able to fit that into his schedule if they were to consider him. But I would love to see Rami Malek as a villain in Bond 25.
Yeah, he'd be an interesting. I mean, I don't know that I like him for Bond just because he's got such a youthful look to him. I mean, he's I'm looking him up now. He's 37 years old, and I thought he was in his 20s.
I didn't think.
So,
I thought he was younger than that. Wow, he's 37.
Yeah. He's at least half Egyptian, I believe. And I'm half Egyptian, so that would be really cool for me personally if if someone like that became Bond, just because it's like, oh,
well,
awesome.
I think he's being considered for a villain for like,
okay.
Like a Bond
well,
villain.
because he's got the dark hair and the blue eyes. I mean, he kind of fits the Bond look, and he's British, right?
Yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah, he'd be a great villain though. Yeah, I'm just excited, man. I mean, usually they turn these out fairly quickly anyway, so if this next one later in the year isn't great, then, we can look forward to another one in about 2 years, probably.
Yeah. Well, that comes to my next question. Where do you see the future of James Bond, or where would you like the future of James Bond to go?
That's an interesting question, because part of me would love to see the books adapted as period pieces. Actually making a 1960s Bond movie. There are a lot of constraints with doing that, but at the same time, screenwriters always talk about the cell phone problem, right? Which is that, now with cell phones, a lot of things that used to unfold over an hour of plot can be done in 5 seconds, So, that could be an interesting way of presenting the character. I would, there's a lot of talk about Idris Elba and, can Bond be a black man, et cetera, et cetera. I'm of the mind that anyone who fits, who personifies James Bond could play James Bond. And I think that Idris Elba completely does that.
I think so too. I mean, I think we obviously have had this discussion with a lot of people who may not agree with me, but I think the cinematic character is supposed to be a contemporary character. So
right,
if you're doing a direct adaptation taking place in the 50s, then no, you can't do that. But
right,
that's not what this series is. A cinematic series is always meant to be contemporary and modern. So I think an actor of color should eventually play Bond, whether it's Idris Elba or someone else. It's I think eventually it'll happen.
And I'm not necessarily of the mind that they need to do that to fill any kind of quota or anything. I do think that when the right person is the right person, then they're the right person, and I think Idris Elba is 100% the right guy. Unfortunately, he's getting a little long in the tooth now in terms of Bond franchise. I mean, I think he's the same age or a year older than Daniel Craig, right? So
yeah, I was thinking about that too. And I don't know what they'll decide to do after Bond 25, but one of my initial thoughts was maybe if you can have Idris Elba as Bond, but it will be for like maybe a short run.
Give him one or two, right?
Like give him two, like a Timothy Dalton kind of thing where he's starting off already established as Bond. He's already been 007 for a long period of time. You're catching him at the tail end of his MI6 career, of his career as a as a 00. And I don't think any other film has sort of really explored Bond aging. Obviously we saw it a little bit in Skyfall, but that was Daniel's third movie, and right. It was more like because he had been off the map than because of his age, really.
Right.
We had that to deal with that. So it would be interesting to sort of have Idris Elba come in after Bond 25 and just sort of explore what it would be like to see Bond sort of at the tail end of his prime, when he's almost at the edge where he won't be able to do it anymore, and sort of explore that.
Yeah, and to your point with Daniel Craig and Skyfall, aside from that, we've seen old Bond, but it wasn't played as old Bond. It was Roger Moore, in his 60s, acting like he's a 30-year-old man, and so I think it would be really interesting to explore that version of the character and see, I'm sure there are other angles they could approach it from other than this sort of, old dog, new tricks, sometimes the old ways are still the best ways, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So yeah, and maybe, Bond has to kind of train his replacement and he's having a hard time letting go of the life, or maybe he's retired and, he kind of gets called back into, maybe even something unofficial, although that's not even a Bond movie anymore. But I guess I'm thinking of, do you remember the last Rambo movie? Where
I actually didn't see. I mean, I'm a huge Sylvester Stallone fan, but I didn't see the last Rambo movie.
Oh, Jack, you should check that one out, man. It's great. Rambo, First Blood is amazing.
Yeah.
I grew up watching First Blood Part 2, so I'm sure I'm nostalgic for it, but I think it is a good movie. 3 was a little shaky, but the most recent one they did, it picks up with him living in Thailand as like a snake wrangler for a snake fighting show, and he's just kind of living this solitary life in the jungle, and these missionaries approach him because they need someone to take them into Burma or Myanmar. They're like a church group who are trying to deliver aid to people there, and no one will take them. And they're like, yeah, somebody told us you have a boat and you might take us. And he refuses, but eventually they talk him into it. And then those people get kidnapped by the government over there. And so he has to go take a team of mercenaries in there to try to free them. So it's very topical. They actually had real Burmese refugees playing parts, including the villain. Yeah, it's really well done. I would check it out. But yeah, all that is to say, maybe something along those lines where Bond has sort of given up his old ways and he's called back into action. Maybe unofficially, maybe like the Equalizer or something. Who knows?
Right.
So I think there's a lot they could do with it, and there's a lot of places they could take it, and I'm excited for whatever they want to give us.
Yeah, no, me too. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Bond 25 as that develops, and we'll learn more, obviously, about casting and locations soon, hopefully. So we'll see. Where can people find you on social media?
I am on Twitter at Ibrahim _M_, and that's IBRAHIM. Instagram, let me type it in quick.
You have a great Instagram. Definitely, if you have Instagram, definitely follow Ibrahim Moustafa. He has some great pictures up.
Thank you. I'm starting to shift more of my content to Instagram just because Twitter is depressing, and it's Twitter. So that is the same, Ibrahim _M_ art. So just the same as Twitter, but art at the end of it.
Okay.
And then my website, IbrahimMoustafa.com. It's got examples of my work. You can see some pages from Solstice on there, as well as, different covers that I've done and other projects I've done for DC and, mostly DC, I guess. Vertigo.
Very cool. All right, so you're going to be working on Bond Origin for the rest of this year. Anything else you'd like to promote?
Not at present. I'm going to be looking to put more of these figures up for sale via my website soon. So I guess be on the lookout for that, and that's something that I'll post about on social media as well. So and yeah, on Twitter I often talk about Bond stuff with people. I love having that kind of discourse. So if you're into it, I'm usually, at least a couple times a month, there's a Bond discussion about an underrated movie or, who could play. One thing I like to do periodically is post different actors who I would have loved to have seen as James Bond. Clive Owen was one, and Jason Isaacs was another. He's kind of like if you took Daniel Craig and Timothy Dalton and morphed him into one person, and he's super charismatic, and I think he would have been amazing.
Yeah, he's really good. He was good. I don't know if you follow Star Trek Discovery, but he was great in that.
That's what I heard. I recently watched I can't remember the name of it now, but it was a PI show. I think from the BBC that he did over the last few years. It's like case studies or case files or something like that. But it was really good. I really enjoyed it. He was kind of the down on his luck PI character. So yeah. I think a case history, so that's what it's called.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's a fun little conjecture I like to do on there sometimes, and people like to chime in with their choices and stuff. So yeah, give it a follow if you're interested.
Very cool. Well, it's been great talking to you, Ibrahim, and I'm looking forward to seeing what's in store for 2019 from Bond in 2019 from you. And definitely thank you for coming by. I really enjoyed talking to you.
It's my pleasure, man. Thank you for having me. And yeah, I enjoy the show. So it's a real treat to be on it with you, man. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, definitely. We'll look forward to what 2019 has in store. And Bond Origin has been great so far, and I'm looking forward to when your contributions start kicking in.
Thank you. Yeah, I believe March is when those drop, the first issue of my run. So cool. Yeah, pretty soon, just around the corner.
All right. Well, it's been great talking to you, and we'll chat some more soon. All right. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you for listening, and thank you so much to Ibrahim Moustafa for joining me for that discussion. I had a great time talking to him. It's just fun to hear him talk about Bond and everything that he's gotten involved with, obviously, from the comics to the stuff that he does outside of his work, including, the figurines and all the artwork that he's done, including some of the movie posters that he's done, which you can find on his social media. Definitely give him a follow on Twitter and also on Instagram. You can find a lot of great content on there. So, definitely check that out. It's also, as I mentioned before, this interview was conducted back in January, but it's fortuitous that it's coming out now because issue 7 of Bond Origin comes out on March 13th, and that's the first issue that Ibrahim Moustafa's contributions kick in. So definitely check that out. If you haven't started reading Bond Origin, you need to get on it. It's definitely a series that's worth following. I've had a great time reading it so far, and I'm really looking forward to seeing Ibrahim Moustafa's artwork and his story contributions when they start kicking in very soon. So definitely do that. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode of James Bond Radio and the Comics of Bond. I've been Jack Lugo, and the Comics of Bond and James Bond Radio will return. Bye.